So we've talked about Webpack a number of times in the past. Usually we've done it in the context of our projects, and I'll probably talk a little bit about that again today. But it's important to kind of fundamentally understand what Webpack is, what it does, why we use it. So up until we had Webpack, we had to deal with putting our JavaScript together in a number of ways that were less than ideal. So let's take a look at some of those ways. I'll just give you a couple of examples. So one of the ways was we would have, well, in the Rails world, you'd have this application JS file. And inside that file, you would add a bunch of require, other file.js kinds of things like this. So this first one might be, I need jQuery. And the second one would be, oh, I need jQuery UI. Whoops, jQuery UI. And so on and so forth. And then, you know, after that, you would include your files. And then the asset pipeline would parse that. And of course, you know, this is valid JavaScript because it's a comment, but the asset pipeline would look at those comments and say, what you really mean is you want to go get this file. And it would go get jQuery and it would put it here. It would get jQuery UI and it would put it here. It would get my file and it would put it here. The problem with this is that my file depends on jQuery. And jQuery UI depends on jQuery. So load order is really important here. If I messed that up, for example, if I did this, my JavaScript would break because jQuery isn't loaded when my file begins to be parsed and executed. So you had to get the load order right. And if there's only 3 files, not a big deal. But we've worked on projects where there are literally hundreds and hundreds of these things, like just tons and tons of these files, just over and over again. And the dependencies are unclear because the my file down here at the bottom, this guy right here might be my file 4, and my file 4 depends on 3 and 5, and then there's a my file 1 here, and 2 depends on 1, but if 2 depended on 3, then all of a sudden we have to remember to go do this. And as we add more and more of these files, it becomes really, really difficult to know where I need to add my files so that the dependencies are included in the correct order. This actually becomes a nightmare, becomes completely unmanageable, and introduces all kinds of bugs. So we don't want to do it that way. Not that many years ago, along came Requirejs, which was another package that handled what's called AMD, or asynchronous module download distribution. I can't remember what the D is exactly, but it's still in use by a lot of people. So you can go take a look at Requirejs. And this project simplified our lives a little bit because it handled the dependencies being loaded in the correct order. It made sure that each module was isolated and defined its specific requirements. I was trying to see if we can see an example. Yeah, it looks something like this right here. So you would do Requirejs and you would list all the things that you needed, and then this help util corresponds to this util right here, and then you can use util inside of your code. So there, instead of having everything in the global namespace, you specifically required what you needed, and then you would use that in your code. These get a little bit ugly. This line, as you add more and more files, more and more dependencies, this list gets really long. Your code ends up nested in these brackets. Not all libraries supported this, so back in the day, we would actually have some code to convert libraries that weren't written in this format to this format, and you know, it was a little bit painful to maintain, but it actually worked really, really well. Node has CommonJS, So whenever you write Node code, you'll see that it uses this CommonJS format, which is what I think most people are now accustomed to. So you would do something like this, and then you could say, define this module exporting a function, and it would return foo.do something, whatever. Again, it's a little bit more difficult to write this type of syntax. So ES6 comes along, and ES6 lets us write things with import statements. So instead of wrapping everything in closures, I can now, and then saying export this specific piece, or import these files and then use them as variables, I can just do things that are really nice, like I can import React from React. Okay. And so ES6 settles this whole problem of different styles of setting up your library, whether it's Requirejs or CommonJS or some other format. And it says, we're going to use the ES6 syntax because we can use Babel with Webpack. And now we can do this nicety that we typically see in most of our code. It's not that Webpack specifically handles imports, it's just that Webpack makes it possible to use ES6 syntax. Interestingly enough, though, if you do have libraries that are still in the old style, whether it's Requirejs or CommonJS, well, and a lot of libraries are actually going to be in CommonJS, Webpack can handle that too. So you can do things like import this from React, and then right here I can do var foo equals require my common JS, whatever. Webpack knows how to handle all these different formats. So that's actually really cool, and you can mix and match this. I don't recommend that unless you have to do it because you want to keep your syntax as clean as possible, but Webpack won't complain. If you notice in this diagram, Webpack is also showing you can have this JS file depend on this Jade file, depend on this CoffeeScript file, and this Jade file can depend on the less file, and these can depend on PNG files, and so on and so forth. The really cool thing about Webpack is that it doesn't matter what your file format is, for the most part. Whether you've got JS packaged up under any number of different formats, whether you use CoffeeScript, if you want to include a less file and a Sass file, Webpack will put all that together for you and just figure it out. That's what makes Webpack so powerful. So I could do things like this. I could say, oh, we need to style this specific file that I'm writing, and I'm going to go into my less directory. I'm going to include bootstrap.less, and maybe I need to require, let's see if that was in a Bootstrap directory somewhere. This is all kind of pseudocode, so apologize for that. It's not going to run. Bootstrap.js, bootstrap.js. So that would include the JavaScript. This would include the less file. And then maybe I don't like to write my code in less. So I have my styles.sass. This is actually something that's really difficult to do in really any other tool that I've ever used. But Webpack makes this super simple. So you can include less, you can include Sass. We actually have an instance of a Rails application that we're working on where the existing code used Bootstrap 2, and it did so through the Rails asset pipeline. But when we started writing this new set of code, we wanted to use Bootstrap 3, like why use the old code? So we used Webpack to bring in the newer Bootstrap. So those live side by side and everything works just fine. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so let's look maybe just a little bit. There's a tutorial out here on the Webpack page that walks through creating a basic application. So let's just do a little bit of that and I'll walk you through it. Okay, so we're going to create index.html. Just going to paste in some basic HTML code here. They've got this bundle, which is going to be the output of our Webpack code. And we're going to write into our application code right here, we're just going to do the document.write like this. And if I go to terminal, I can run Webpack. And the first thing I'm going to put in is my application.js. And I'm going to say output to bundle.js. And you'll see that Webpack ran. It figured out what it needed to do with this application.js. We don't have any requires or imports or anything, so it's pretty simple. But you'll notice now that we have this bundle.js sitting here. And this bundle.js does not look like our document.write file. So Webpack is inserting all of the code that it needs to handle the loading of things in the correct order. So you would say, well, this isn't necessary, like that's a bunch of extra code, but when you start to build a larger project, this little bit of extra code goes a long way to making sure that everything is included in the right order and that all your dependencies are correct. So now if I open up this file, let's see. We can see it works. So that's simple. You can use Webpack directly from the command line. You don't have to set up a config file. That's what we've talked about in a lot of our previous trainings. And so I guess I would say the config files become necessary as your projects grow complex. But if you have a really simple project, you can just run this from the command line. It's very, very simple, very easy to use. Okay, so taking a look at the tutorial here, we want to add another file. So let's do that. Let's add a content.js file. And content.js just exports a string. This is directly from the tutorial. Like, I didn't make this up, so I'll make sure to attribute that to the guys, whoever wrote the documentation for Webpack. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go into our application.js, and we're going to require our content.js, and we're just going to write that into the document. So now, oops, we got to go build it. We'll go here, we'll build it. Notice that it built it successfully. Refresh the file, and there you go. Okay, so now we have, it works, and it works from content.js. So that you can see now we've included the content from content.js. And I could have also done something like this that probably looks a little bit more familiar, where we do our content equals this, and then we can document.write content, save that. We'll build it again with Webpack. And there you go, same thing. Okay, so now we need to look at loaders. So loaders are what let Webpack bring different kinds of files into your JavaScript project. So we use loaders to parse all of our JavaScript because we use a Babel loader, which transpiles our ES6 and even ES7 scripts from future syntax into current syntax. We also sometimes will use CSS loaders and other types of loaders. You can use image loaders that help to minify your images, make them a little bit smaller, and do all kinds of different processing. Okay, let's show a CSS one. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add style.css, and we're just going to make the background yellow. And now if I go into here, I can say require, and this is how I tell it which loader to use. So I'm going to use the style loader, I'm going to use the CSS loader. The bangs are like separators. So this says use this loader, then use this loader, and then so we're going to use style.css. And I believe that they go right to left. So it means take this file, this is the file we're requiring, send it to the CSS loader, and then send it to the style loader. If I remember correctly, it does it in that order. Let's see if this works. Run that.
So what's the difference between CSS and style loader?
That's a good question. I believe, let's go look. It's been a little while, so it's probably good to, let's see, Webpack, CSS Loader. they have a dependency on each other. So when you use the CSS, it seems like you always have to use the style, but maybe that's not true. Let's see. Webpack style. So it says combine it with the CSS loader. You know, I don't remember. I just know that you always use them together. So it looks like the style loader is what actually can write the CSS into the document. So you can see like here in the source code, add styles to DOM. I think it's actually writing the style tags into the DOM. The CSS loader. Oh, okay. So it looks like this looks for the import. So you can do import like images and other style sheets using the @import. Parses that. So yeah, it looks like this basically just parses your CSS style sheets and then makes it so that Webpack can inject it into the page, and this handles the actual injecting into the page.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So the documentation on some of this stuff is a little lacking, I guess, in terms of like they show you how to use it, but they don't always say why you would use it. You see these point to just using loaders. So you can just go to the Webpack, what are loaders, and it's like you can chain them, and they handle figuring out managing that specific piece of content and bringing it in. But I don't think that they talk about what each loader does specifically. You can see here that here's a more complex loader. So if I wanted to take bootstrap.less, then I have to feed it to the less loader, which knows what to do with the less code. And then that'll output CSS. That code is then fed to the CSS loader, which will do whatever it needs to do to the CSS specific syntax. And then that is fed to the style loader, which knows how to load it into the page. And then includes any of the code required to do that. Okay. Anyway, pretty sure that's what's going on here. All right, let's see. So the next step here is that if you don't want to have to do this all the time, you can bind a loader, it looks like. So it says we can bind file extensions to loaders and do it this way. But you can see how long your command line is going to start to get, right? Like if I had to do this with every single loader, it becomes really, really painful. But let's try it. So if I just include styles, then I can go and run this command. And it's telling me it can't find CSSY. I wonder if the CSS loader. Yeah, I don't know why it's not finding that. But this again is why we don't do this on the command line, because the configuration to actually build one of our projects would be lines and lines long. I think I've showed you this before, but here's our Webpack config, and you can see here's where we set up our JS loaders and our CSS loaders and our Sass loaders and our less loaders. So just extrapolating from kind of what we've been looking at so far, our JS loaders use a Babel loader, and we give it stage 0, which basically turns on everything. And we also tell it to include a runtime. All of this changes with Babel 6. I'm still figuring out the syntax, so I apologize. I don't have that ready yet, but eventually we'll get that ready and then I'll show that. But that's basically what we do with our JavaScript. Here's our CSS loader. So you can see there's the style loader, there's the CSS loader. We also run it through an auto prefix loader. That will add browser specific prefixes. You've probably seen the Mozilla Dash or the web, what is it? I can't remember what the other ones are. Anyway, all the different CSS prefixes, that handles it for you, so you don't have to write those in there by hand. Here's the Sass loader. So this will take an SCSS file and turns it into CSS. This will take a less file and turn it into CSS. So you can see that the less loaders just take the CSS loaders, and they just stick themselves right here. So this would send it through the auto prefixer. Actually, they stick themselves over here, sorry. So it's going to send it through the less loader, send it through the auto prefixer, send it through the CSS loader, and then send it through the style loader. So they go right to left. All of these are then set up down here underneath this loaders section. And all that this file does is makes it so that you don't have to do this kind of stuff on the command line. So you can see we say, hey Webpack, your entry file is this guy. This is where you're going to start. Output this guy right here, and then here's some of your build options. So whenever you run across the CSS file, you need to run it through CSS and then the style loader. And that didn't work, probably because I don't have something installed correctly, but whatever, because we don't typically want to do it that way. All right, are there any questions so far about Webpack and how all of this works?
I think, I don't know if this applies to what you've covered already, but the question that I have would be, how would I take like a CSS framework, for example? So I've done like an npm install whatever, let's say Bootstrap, because everyone knows what that is. How would I use that and kind of pull that into my project with Webpack?
Okay, that's a great question. So let's try it. Let's see if we can figure it out here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take our existing project here one step further. I'm going to create a webpack.config.js file. I'm going to drop in their example, which is this module exports right here, which says our entry is entry. We used application, so I just need to change that. And I'll get to your answer here in just one second. Okay, so you can see there was this was our entry. Oh, that's why it's not finding it, because I'm an idiot and I copied and pasted this from the tutorial. If I type application.js, okay, we'll do it this way. Find. Okay, it's still not finding it, so whatever. We're going to ignore that and just move past it then. So our entry is application.js. Back on the command line, that was given to us as this guy right here. That's your entry point. This is your output, bundle.js. Here's your output, bundle.js. You can give it a path so you can output it anywhere you like. That comes in really handy if you need to output to a build directory or something else. Here's our loaders. So you test for this, meaning anything that matches this guy right here is going to be sent through the CSS loader and then through the style loader. Okay, so that's step one here. And then you just run, I guess Webpack will just look for it. So let's just try running Webpack in this directory. And it did, it worked. Okay, So we're still taking this guy and outputting it into bundle.js, and then we've got this guy here, which will pick it up. Let's test that really quickly. And the background went to yellow, so yes, it did. All right, so now how would I use Bootstrap? Okay, so let's try npm install save Bootstrap. I'm going to let that install for just a second. Well, maybe it was pretty fast actually. So we should have Bootstrap sitting in our modules direct. No, it didn't actually install it. Okay, so maybe I need a package JSON before it'll actually install it. All right, so I'm going to just steal some of the stuff out of this other app really quickly. I'm going to keep this one script in here because this will actually be handy for us to build. So we can run Webpack, and the config is just going to be webpack.config.js. And don't care about most of this other stuff. But just clean that out, whatever. Okay, so trailing comma somewhere right there. Okay, so now we have this node modules directory, right? Bootstrap. Okay, so there's all of my Bootstrap files. This is a pre-existing library, and if I go into my less directory, you can see there's a whole bunch of different less files. Okay, so now the question is, how do I use Webpack to include those styles? So let's go back into our Webpack config. And if you look at our Webpack config over here, the ones that we use with our projects, it should have, let's see, right there. I'm going to grab this resolves, and we're going to drop it right here. And we're going to say our modules directory includes node modules. That tells Webpack that it needs to go look in that modules directory. You can't see it because I've excluded it from my Sublime project here, but if you go to the command line, you can see here's our node modules directory. So now that is included in the path that Webpack is going to search when it tries to find different files. So with any luck, I should be able to come in here and say require Bootstrap. Yes. Let's see if that will work. Okay. And in our package JSON, I kept this build script right here, which just is, it's just going to run this on the command line. We'll go run this directly without npm first, just to see if that even works. Okay, so it's saying it can't find something here. Can't find module Bootstrap. Okay. We got to go up. There. Okay, now we can run it. Okay, so it couldn't resolve bootstrap.less because it couldn't find it. So we are including node modules, but let's see here. I might still have to give it, let's see, modules, bootstrap. Should be, there's a bootstrap.less. Let's try this. Oops. Sorry. Let's copy it again. Just hate typing out really long commands, so. Okay, it is still not finding it. So we're going to do it a different way. I'm going to go into my styles.js right here, and I'm going to change this to style.less. Oops, not that. And we're going to import it from node modules. We're just going to give it the full path. For some reason, it's not resolving this without a full path. Okay, so now I can just require style right there. Let's try it again. Well, style. We don't have a less loader, so now I need to go get a less loader right here. Actually, yeah, let's do that. And okay, so the one thing I forgot to do was to add the loader, everything I've been just telling you. So if I add the less loader, and hopefully that's the right thing, looks like it is, then we should be able to parse the less files. There we go. That looks a little bit better. But now it's saying you need to have something that can handle these different font types. So I gotta go remember which loader we need for that. It's probably URL loader is what we need. Okay, so the URL loader will make it possible to include fonts. So you can see these are web fonts. That's what the WOFF, TTF, PNG and SVG and TT. No, yeah, PNG and SVG are going to be images. So now we got to go do the image or the URL loader too. One thing I haven't been doing is when I do npm install, I should be installing these in dev. Okay, so now we've actually managed to get it to build. So let's go look and see how our page looks. Okay, so it's still running, still works. If I look in my bundle.js, you'll see this is a much larger file now. So up here somewhere we can probably find our it works code and our document.write content code. Here's where it's going to load the styles. So down below then, sonnet. Here's where it's including those different fonts. And you can see that it's embedding them with base64 encoding. It's actually sticking them inside of this bundle file. And there's a way that you can extract that out so that it doesn't include everything in the bundle file. But if you just want one file to include in your project, then this is really handy. Like, this is everything included in one. So now, if I come into here, I should be able to do like div class equals content. I'm trying to remember some Bootstrap code here. And button class equals button primary. Let's see what happens. Okay, so there's my button. I should put this as a button. Let's get rid of the really ugly yellow background. Oops. And let's go rebuild this. There we go. So you can see this is a button that has the Bootstrap styling. You can see we've gotten rid of the yellow background. So we've successfully brought in Bootstrap, a third-party library, using Requirejs. It wasn't terribly painful. I just imported the less file into my styles less, and then I just had to add a couple more loaders to Webpack in order to handle that. Now you'll notice our process, our development process here is actually kind of sucky. I come in and I make a change. I say, what was it before, yellow? Make it red. If I go check my browser now, it didn't turn red. Instead, I have to remember, oh yeah, I've got to go rebuild my files. And now if I refresh the page, now it's red. So a lot of what we've done in the starter apps is making it so that that's continually running in the background, and or one of the biggest challenges we had was, instead of having our application, and in our case our application backend is usually Rails, so instead of having the Rails asset pipeline serve those assets, we have the Webpack server serve up those assets. So you'll notice we have this Webpack hot.js right here. This turns on a Webpack dev server that listens on the port that you give it. And that's what the .env file in most of our projects is all about. So we have this assets URL and assets port. This is where the Webpack server is listening. And then the Rails server, this project specifically doesn't have a Rails server. This is a client-only one. But in our ones that do have Rails, Rails will be listening on a different port, like 3080 or 3000 or something like that. So the requests are actually going to two different servers. But the nice thing about doing it that way is that I don't have to go to the command line every time I make a change and do this. Instead, the assets are served from the Webpack dev server, and so they're immediately available. Like it recognizes a file change and it will serve you the changed data. So if you go look at your console while you're writing one of these apps, you'll see a bunch of output, and it will say Webpack completed successfully or something like that. And it just indicates that, yes, everything built, so you've made it to that step at least. Your code doesn't have syntax errors. If your code does have syntax errors, it will frequently spit those errors out into your console. Okay, so does that answer your question about how to bring in a library? And
Absolutely, that was fantastic. Yeah, that's super easy.
Okay, yeah, it is. It is really easy when you start. If you use Webpack in a basic context, it's actually pretty easy to use. If you begin to add more complexity, which we do, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The Webpack dev server, you've got to get all of these settings right. You can see that we've turned on cores, for example. It allows basically any kind of request from any other domain. Instead of just outputting to bundle.js, it takes the entry. In our case, in this simpler app right here, the entry would be application, right? And so this would be application underscore Webpack underscore bundle JS. Let's see, and then there's one other piece, which is this works with the React hot reload. Where is it at? Ah, there it is. So you can see our JS loaders. If we're not if we're in release, we just move on. But if we're not in release, we add the React hot loader onto our JS loaders, and that allows us to get that kind of live update. So as you change your React code, it should immediately reflect those changes. Let's demonstrate that. Hopefully this will actually work. Actually, I've got it running right here. So npm hot. Okay, so we've got these npm scripts. This isn't in the code we were just writing. This is in one of these starter apps. We've got this React client starter app. And if I run npm run hot, it will run this script right here, which runs Webpack hot, which is this file that we were just looking at. So it turns on this Webpack dev server. It should give me, see, there's all the Webpack output. You can turn it down so it's not quite so noisy, but then you won't see the errors. Looks like we're listening on 8021. So if I go to 8021, it should get React starter app output. I don't know what that is. And now if I go into my JS folder and I modify one of my React components, I believe it's this home right here. So that's where this guy is. If I do I'm home, you'll see that it automatically did that. I didn't have to refresh the page. So that's the React hot reloader in action. So that's pretty convenient. It works for your React components, and it speeds up your development. Now, having said that, the React hot loader is actually deprecated with the changes to Babel 6 and the author's kind of path going forward. I think he's writing this as a as a Babel plugin or something. So we'll need to adapt, but it's not totally available in a form that I'm comfortable making all the updates right now. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks that will be possible, and then we will switch over to that. Okay, so does that kind of provide you with a basic introduction to Webpack, and are there any questions? Okay.